Today we're going to be discussing COVID-19 perspectives and launching your own practice with special guest Vince Reese. Welcome to the Law Firm Launch Podcast.
Vince Reese.
Jaimee, how are you?
I'm so good. I'm so excited about us finally launching this podcast. You know, we've been talking about it, I think, for a year now. And as you know, priorities get in the way and things just get kicked down the road. But it's called Law Firm Launch Podcast, right? And it's like the whole concept is we want to empower lawyers that are either in existing firms that want to grow and launch to kind of get some ideas for the next level of growth, or lawyers that are thinking about starting up their own thing, getting some ideas about what that looks like. And certainly, Mickus O'Toole has experienced a lot of growth over the last few years, and especially under your leadership. So I think it's perfect and fitting that you would be joining us today and sharing your wisdom, my friend.
Well, I am glad to be here, and I understand what you mean about things getting kicked down the road. Sorry it's taken us so long to connect. But no, you're right. We have experienced a lot of growth over the last 4 years. It's been a fun ride, but a little bit of a wild ride too. So I'm happy to talk about it.
Hey, I say it's not fun if it's not wild.
There we go. Good.
Well, why don't we jump in and just, I know we can't start a podcast where we're gaining knowledge from people and wisdom and not address a global pandemic that's going on, in this world. So I want to start there, even though that's not the focus of the podcast, because, what's going on in our society greatly impacts our businesses, and so maybe start there with just some of your key lessons learned during the pandemic, during everything going on within our society. Just kind of a free question, you can answer it professionally, personally, whatever. But what are some of your key lessons learned over the last few months?
That's very good. For me, I think the biggest lesson that I learned is the value of being flexible. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, if, this is, we're in June now, if we all go back in time to like February, 4 short months ago, we were all sort of going along our normal business, thinking things were fairly normal. And within weeks, we saw sort of our world be sort of turned upside down. I mean, things that we took for granted stopped, things that we never thought would happen happened, all of a sudden you're down one track and now the whole world's a different track. And I really think for me, both personally and professionally, what came out of that for me is the value of being flexible, being able to sort of adapt quickly and be nimbly and sort of move with the flow, because as you know, things were ever changing during that time. I don't know, a sense of humor too, because you can't take things too seriously. Because it was, it's like, well, what's tomorrow going to be? I don't know. Let's figure it out. And that was sort of our kind of our mantra. And the only other thing I would say that to me was the lesson I learned too is the value of relationships. Because I will tell you, as you probably know, when things or get stressful or things are chaotic, everybody's under stress. Yeah. And if you've got good working relationships with people or good personal relationships, it makes it so much easier to adapt and overcome those things than if you don't have those good relationships to fall back on.
Those are such good points. And I'm so glad that you brought up this concept of relationships, because it's no secret that public opinion about lawyers is not all that positive, right? I was just talking this morning about, the ABA did that study where 50% of all Americans think we need less lawyers. And 60% of all Americans think lawyers only care about money and not about their clients or their people. And I'm hoping this podcast does even more than what we want it to do from a professional sense, but that it also helps to shape the public's perception of lawyers. Because I have to tell you, you're my 5th podcast recording, and every single guest has brought up the importance of relationships.
Wow.
And the importance of relationships, not just in a what I have to gain, but more so about what I have to give and how important it's been for us to develop these relationships together to get through something together, right?
Yep.
And I'm just so glad you brought that up, because I think it's going to help others to see, here are these law firm owners that have experienced all this success that are saying, during this very difficult time, relationships have been one of the most important things I've learned to embrace. I just think that's awesome.
I think it's awesome too. It's funny. We were, everybody's phasing back into work now. It's slowly but surely. And it's weird. I was in the office the other day and I came across a couple of people I work with, employees that I hadn't seen for 2 months, right? Because of the way things were, and we're laughing and joking about actually looking forward to coming back into work on a regular basis, getting back to seeing people and getting, and I think when you talk about relationships, I think that's part of it, right? Is the, you look at the value of people wanting to come back together. I think it's interesting. I think we as human beings are sort of relationship driven. We are communal people by nature. And so when we had that sort of forced isolation time, I think for a lot of us, we realized, we're much better off when we're working together and we're doing things collaboratively and working in cooperation than we are when we're sort of isolated.
You're so right. You're so right. Well, on that note too, I think of, hey, we're better together. What are some of the good things that you've seen during this time? We've all been so focused on the ever-changing environment and learning and educating, and there's some fear there, uncertainty. I think taking time to celebrate the good, that's been going on. Share some of that with us.
Yeah. So for me, it's interesting. I think about, how much my life changed literally almost overnight, and I spent much more time working from home. And I have a 12-year-old daughter, and, I spent, my daughter and I, it was just the two of us, and we spent a lot of time together for several months. And, there are times when I'm sure we got on each other's nerves, but by and large, it was really a positive thing for me. I got to spend a lot more time with her, talk to her every single day for hours a day. Even when you're just home, being around her. So I thought that was really a positive I took from it. And I think what I took out of that is even when things go back to normal, we'll try to carve out more of that time, and going forward, just because I think having experienced it, having understood that, it made it more important. And then, so that was one. The other thing I think is perspective, having your life, our society kind of changed really quickly at a moment's notice. At some point you have a little bit of time to sit back and reflect upon things. And it gave me a little better perspective. First I felt very fortunate for what I have and what I'm and everything else, because I understand how traumatic this was for a lot of people. Yeah. And as unnerving as it was for me, it wasn't traumatic in that my livelihood didn't necessarily stop. And I know that there are other people out there in the world who the impact upon it was much more dramatic and much more jarring and financially and everything else. And so it gave me some perspective to be really thankful for what you have, which I thought was really important. And then, you also think about what this pandemic was. It was the people were getting sick and dying. And so, your health and being healthy and not being sick and not, that is something that we assume that we have, and sometimes we take for granted. But as I kind of did some perspective thinking and thought about it, it's something you don't want to take for granted as well. So
you're right. It is so important when we start to feel down or uncertain, thinking about what other people are experiencing. We were on one of our weekly calls with law firm owners a few weeks ago, and someone said, you know what, guys, we're all still eating well.
Yeah.
We're all still eating well. And there's so many, people and kids that aren't eating well during this time. And it does give us perspective. And I think also a renewed sense of what we have to give, right? Yeah. And I have seen so much philanthropy where it maybe wasn't there before coming out of this as well. So perspective is key, and it's been neat, I think, to see action as well.
The other thing too, and I agree with everything you said. The other thing, I guess, for me personally too, is, as an owner of a law firm, you're also the owner of a business, right? And so, we talk about perspectives and lessons learned and stuff like that. You've got 35 people who, in some way, shape, at least for me, it's one shape or form, their livelihood is intertwined with what you're doing, and
Right.
and you start really getting some perspectives about the importance of trying to make sure that you're doing things that are not just in your best interest, but also as making sure that that they are being taken care of as well. And I think that's there was that sort of responsibility was something that kind of hit home in that process.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that you shared that. Well, on that topic of business ownership, right, and leading a business, I know, a lot of lawyers, I mean, much of our industry exists with small firms, right? I mean,
Sure.
95% of all law firms are 20 or less lawyers. And so lawyers tell me all the time, they never taught us how to run a business in law school. And yet 95% of us find our way into entrepreneurship, right? And so as lawyers are considering, either a few of them leaving and starting up their own practice from where they're at, or starting up a solo practice, or, going into running this entity that now they very much have responsibility for, not just themselves, as you talked about, but for their people and the people that are going to come to them in the future. What advice would you give those lawyers that are thinking about starting up their own firm or stepping into business ownership as a lawyer in some way? Give us your biggest and best advice.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is I think doing your homework on the front end. I mean, I don't know that you can do too much preparation or too much homework when you think about it. I mean, it's as the legal industry is a very competitive marketplace, right? And if you're going to go out there and start your own firm, I think, really spending a lot of time trying to figure out what you're trying to accomplish, what type of law firm do you want to be, what's going to be your niche in the market, what's going to be your strategy in the market, where are you going to get your clients, where are you going to get your talent from, if it's not just you, where are you going to get the other attorneys and everything else. All of those things, I think the more time you spend planning on the front end, I think the fewer headaches you'll have once you go down that road. So that's something I would strongly encourage everyone to do, is to really make it a very deliberative process. And if you've got friends or confidants, especially people who started firms before, go talk to them and say, hey, what's the one thing when you were planning you didn't think of that caught you by surprise?
Mm-hmm.
What's the one thing that after you got into it, you're like, oh, I wish I would have known this on the front end, and ask those questions of people so that when you go in there, you're as prepared as you can be. Because that's the one thing, and this ties back into our whole thing, is that for me, coming from a very large firm to a small firm, the potential volatility is so much greater, right? So things can change on a dime. Things can be so much more unexpected. So the more preparation you put in, certainly the better. And then I guess I'll say the one other thing I would say is make sure that you really want to be in the business of running a business. And that's the other thing too, is because, I think a lot of people, as you said earlier, went to law school with the idea of being a practicing law. And I don't know that anybody went to law school with the idea of wanting to run a business, right? And and as you said, they don't teach you how to run a business. And if you're going to start your own law firm, for me, it's like you have two jobs, right? You have your practicing law job, but equally as important is your running a business job. And so you have to really be committed to that second job, which is the running of the business job, and giving that equal time and equal attention as you do practicing law, which I think is catches some people by surprise because it's not, the running the business part is equally as important as the practicing law part. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm in my head, I'm like in the pew, like amening you over here. I am, because the planning, I often say when lawyers are starting up their own practice, I have found many times they're running away from something, not to something.
Yep.
And that's where they don't plan, because the plan is, I just want to get away from the things that maybe I don't like about where I'm at today, but they don't spend enough thinking about where they want to be and why they want to be there and what they're hoping to achieve. So you can end up in some murky waters,
Sure.
when you haven't done that planning. I mean, you end up in partnership with people that you didn't fully vet what the future looks like. And now you've got 3 different ideas of what the future looks like,
Yep.
So I'm really glad that you emphasized planning, and that, yes, it is running a business and understanding that going into it. is really important, because some lawyers might say, I don't really like running a business. I just don't like being in a big firm. And they're a better fit for a smaller firm environment. But I think many times it perpetuates issues within a practice that starts up, because you're running away from something, not running to something else. So I love that. Good planning, and understand that you are running a business, and you're going to have to be okay with that and enjoy that.
And I'll say, you mentioned partners and our people that you work with, and it kind of goes back to what I said about relationships and everything else. The one thing I also say too is, if you're going to be starting up a small firm, not by yourself, you're going to bring other people in. Really, I think you hit on a very good point. Making sure that you spend some time thinking about the people that you're going into business with, that you have similar goals in mind, and not just what your goals are, but you have the same goal, the same horizon. All right, are your goals 5-year goals and theirs are 20-year goals, or theirs are 2 and yours are 6? But having the same goals, the same vision, and then also equally important, I think the 2 more things. One is, I think you really want to try to make sure there are people that you personally like, because I think that when the times get tough, liking someone, having a relationship to fall back on is what you really need, and people you respect, right? So I think those are equally as important. I wouldn't just go in business with my friends if I didn't respect their ability as business people or as lawyers, but I also don't want to go into business with people who I respect as business people and lawyers if I don't think they can be my friends. So I think you would have both.
That is so good, Vince. That is so good, and it's so true, and something I doubt many people think about, because there's always this statement of, oh, it's not personal, it's business, right? And it's like, no, if you're going into business ownership, it is always personal, right? It's always personal. So I love that. I think that's something that probably not a lot of people think about, and it's true. You need to be friends and genuinely like the people that you're going into partnership with.
Well, I'll say this, and I heard people say this before, and it's really true. When you're at a small firm, you will spend as much time with your partners as you do with your spouse or your significant other, right?
Or more time sometimes.
or more time. So if you think about it from that perspective, I mean, you're going to spend a lot of time with these people. Your finances, your future, everything you do is going to be intertwined with them. And so, think about that and go through that process the same that you would be doing if you're making any type of really long-term relationship commitment.
You're so right. You know what, Vince, this has been awesome. I feel like you've got such a great perspective, and I really respect you and appreciate what you've done at Mikasa O'Toole since you've been there, even though the firm's been around for a while. I think that's a real testament to, bringing a visionary into a firm, right, that does think like a business person, that is excited about running the business side of a practice. And you just have a heart of gold. You care about people, care about relationships, and I just think that's so critical to businesses succeeding as well. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom that you shared today.
No, thank you very much. It was great getting on this. Sorry it took us so long, but I've enjoyed it, and thank you for your help as well. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in today. Be sure to hit subscribe or go to legalbackoffice.com for more info.